You would then have had to come up with a method as to how you were going to go about doing the investigations. Could you just tell the chairperson as to the method that you adopted in conducting the investigations?
Excuse me. There were two limitations that we started off with. One is that the matter was already out there unfolding in the public space, and that's the context. And secondly, we were given just a little over a week to do this whole investigation of a whole event that even if some people were aware of it, we in this task team were not aware of. So to go back and establish all of that would take time, we understood, even as we started. Excuse me. So we then sat around the table and we said, by the way, not all of us were present at the time. Mr. Lomo was traveling, so he was not in the country, so he was appointed in absentia, but he was due to return either that day or the following day. So what then transpired was we sat around the table and we said, now that we have been appointed and now that we are facing very limited timelines, how are we going to deliver on this mandate? Obviously, the aviation sector is quite a complicated sector, and it's not a sector that we are operating in, or at least we were operating in at that point in time. And there was a need, therefore, to get to understand the protocols associated with that, as well as, obviously, the protocols in defense and the protocols in DERCO. We then realized that the team was very thin in terms of numbers as well. It just meant that you had 4 people to do all of this all at once in 2 weeks to get this work finalized. We then agreed that we will do all the work together. We will sit with people together. We will talk to them together. We will prepare documents together. But initially, because Mr. Lomo was not around, I undertook that I was going to do the writing, the inviting, and of all the people that we would identify, obviously, as the process unfolded, but those that were easily identifiable, we then started writing to them. I undertook that process for 2 reasons. One, because of limited time, you needed to give people a reasonable opportunity to understand why you were calling them, and a reasonable opportunity for them to make themselves available and to respond and or to send statements or whatever it is that they would ultimately conclude they wanted to do. So I took that responsibility. So that was a responsibility, but it wasn't a formalized responsibility. It was a responsibility that I said I will do, and in addition to everything else that we were going to do. So part of how we were going to get this investigation to get rolling, there were a few things that we were going to do. We were going to do, other than letter writing, we were going to do interviews of identified people. We were going to talk to everyone. We were going to read all the documents, protocols, and everything that would have been in place. We will talk to committees that already were set up, or some kind of investigations that were set up in different departments arising out of this landing, of this Gupta chartered aircraft at the time. Once we would have been done with that, we would then sit and assess how much information we still needed after talking to everybody that we would have interviewed. And if we needed more information, we will interview people again and again until we were satisfied that we had the information. Obviously, this within the scope of the limited time that we had.
Yes. Now, if I may just refer you to, you have a bundle that is marked Exhibit FF1 in front of you, which has your statement. I would like you to just identify the report, because we're going to go to how you decided to split up the investigations into certain phases. Could you turn to page, I beg your pardon, could you just...
Sorry,
no.
I do apologize.
No.
Well, Ms. Norman, did we enter this into the record, this exhibit?
Oh, not yet. No, not yet, Chairperson. We haven't.
We should have, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Could you just...
The file
FF1.
containing Ms. Nkululeko Sindane's statement will be marked Exhibit FF1.
As Chairperson pleases, thank you.
Yes.
Then, Ms. Sindane, if you could just take, there's a divider that's marked 2, number 2. And once you page on, you'll see number 5 begins with the JCPS cluster report. Okay, and then that report goes right up to page, give me the last page, up to page 34.
Sorry.
Do you see that?
You
Do you
said
identify?
up to page 34,
34, yes.
under divider 2.
Yes, yes.
The report I have goes up to page 30. Or you mean your
Oh, no,
labeling,
no, yes,
not
yes,
the page numbering?
yes, our
Okay.
pagination.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
and that's the
correct.
report that came out of the investigation.
Yes. it
Thank
is.
you.
Excuse me.
Thank you. I see in paragraph 2.1 of that report, you deal with the phases. You decided to split the work into, you've got the pre-arrival phase, you've got the arrival phase, and you deal with them. Could you just tell the chairperson how you dealt with those phases and who you interviewed?
Well, don't you want her to identify the report first?
She's
before
just
going into
identified
it?
it. She
I
has,
didn't hear that, so it
no,
must.
yes, she has just identified it.
Ms. Ndane, the document that you have been referred to, which appears at page 5 at the top there, under 2, what is that document?
It is the report that was issued by the ministers of the JCPS cluster after being prepared by the task team.
Is that the product of the work of the investigation team that you were part of?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I must have missed that, Ms. Noma.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
sir. Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Then you had referred her to a particular
Yes,
page.
paragraph
Yes.
2.1, yes. At page 9, you've got the pre-arrival phase, okay? Could you just briefly outline what you looked for in trying to get facts around that phase?
First, we had to understand how the Waterkloof Air Base works. And because unless we understood that, we wouldn't be able to get to whether there was any violation or otherwise. The natural reaction would have been to go to the OR Tambo Airport. So to get to the Waterkloof Air Base was the first thing that we had to understand. How does it work? So that was the pre-arrival phase. So if any person wants to, for instance, apply to come to South Africa and apply to land at Waterkloof Air Base, what should they comply with? Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing. Now, the Waterkloof Air Base, as it was then, I don't know whether it still is today, but as it was then, its responsibility was generally to receive, for instance, aircraft of heads of states and deputy heads of states, as well as obviously defense top brass, as it were. Now, to then have this aircraft landing there, we had to understand how that works. Thank you so much. How that unfolded. So that was the first thing. So obviously there are certain protocols that needed to be followed. And one of those protocols was obviously to announce that request, and that request is done formally through a note verbal, which is done from an originating country into DERCO in our country. DERCO is the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. So that request goes to DERCO, and then DERCO processes it, and once DERCO has processed it, they either say they approve or they don't approve. So we had to understand that. Secondly, we had to understand how things work at the Air Force Base itself in terms of the structures. Does anyone have to be approached? And if that person is to be approached, who is that person? What kind of level are they in terms of seniority? And what are they approached for? What should they be doing? Then the third issue was to look at if the people are bringing something into the country, as would be normal in the traveling guests, what kind of customs and excise responsibilities would be imposed on Waterkloof Air Base in particular in receiving those guests. And then what kind of clearances are needed, and if those clearances are needed, who must apply for a clearance, who must give the clearance, under what circumstances the clearance must be given. And then we also had to understand what then becomes the role of DERCO other than just receiving a note verbal. And once the DERCO has decided that this is an appropriate visit, what does DERCO do in terms of mobilizing and arranging with other departments to do what is necessary as per the categorization of that visit? And then obviously looking at how were these guests going to be led out of the Waterkloof Air Base, as it were. So those were the key things perhaps that we had to focus on. But for any visit in South Africa, whether it happens privately or otherwise, Home Affairs plays a very significant role. So we needed to understand what role Home Affairs was expected to play, what role did they actually play in terms of identifying and discharging its role in relation specifically to the aircraft.
Yes. Now, in dealing with those phases, your pre-arrival, arrival, post-arrival, and exit phase, you would have to rely on information that you would have gathered. So, did you interview people, or did some of them submit affidavits? How did you go about doing that?
We did both. We interviewed people. And indeed, some gave affidavits. But let me start by, even before getting to interviewing people, we had to read the protocols, but maybe, I don't know whether I'm allowed to just step back a bit, because I think it does allow for some level of context to be understood in this commission. Prior to the actual appointment of this task team, there were already a number of meetings that were happening in government, in national government. Let me not say in government as if all government levels, but in national government. There were a number of meetings already happening, no least of which was the meeting by the Government Communication Systems, GCIS, to try and respond to the flurry of the inquiries that were arising as a result of this. Secondly, there were meetings that were being initiated by NCOC within the space of NCOC, and NCOC is an agency under state security, to deal with what had transpired. So these meetings were already happening. There were also meetings of and these meetings would feed into the JCPS cluster, which I was chairing at the time. So all of this then comes into context with how did we deal with these issues. So two meetings then that I would like to focus on. One is the meeting of communicators, because that meeting almost drove the agency and the pressure with which this investigation had to be undertaken. And of course, ministers were also meeting to try and understand what was going on at the time. Secondly, the NCOC meeting was a meeting where a whole range of people, senior government personnel in the defense space in particular, SABS, Home Affairs, and all of us including myself. We participated in that meeting, but the convener was Ncheche of that meeting. And in this meeting, it was really for the first time for me to understand the nature of what had happened. And those meetings happened probably either on the 1st or the 2nd of or the 1st or the 2nd of May, just as we were being appointed or just before we were being appointed. So as a result of that, of these meetings, a whole lot of information started flowing, and we started understanding the magnitude of the problem that had just arisen. And so when we then met and we were appointed, that context was almost like a flow from the original work that had been done in these meetings, or discussions that had been done in these meetings, straight into what the investigation team was ultimately going to start investigating. So that was the context that I just wanted to put before you. So then to come back to your question as to how did we do this, we identified people that we were going to invite to these sessions, which is the discussion sessions or the interview sessions. And those people, we started off with where the first discussion about the request to host this wedding started, which would have been at OR Tambo, therefore AXA. So we identified to speak with the CEO of AXA, and luckily the CEO of AXA was quite responsive. When he knew we wanted to speak to him, he responded immediately. So we then had a discussion with him, and that discussion was telephonic. The second person, and I'm not going to itemize all of the people that we identified, but the second person that we identified we needed to speak with would have been the Minister of Transport at the time. We didn't invite him almost immediately, but we identified him and we knew more or less what his movements were likely to be. So when we did call him ultimately, he made himself available, and we literally drove to where he was and we interviewed him, and that was the end of that. And we requested for a statement. He also gave us a statement subsequently, just to confirm our discussions. The other people that we identified would have been obviously the Gupta family. It would have been a whole range of other people, but key to those people would have been in DERCO, Ambassador Kolwane. And why Ambassador Kolwane? Because he is an official, I don't know whether he still is, but he was the official responsible for this kind of work where international guests land in South Africa on a state visit kind of arrangement. You would have had to apply to him, and he would have had to assess and then talk to the Department of Defense accordingly.
Yes. Just to take you back, you mentioned that you had to invite members of the Gupta family. May I just, there is a bundle, small bundle, next to you, which is marked Exhibit FF8. Just, if you can just move your hand back. It's just there.
I think it's the lever arch
The
file
lever
on
arch file, the
the
small one.
other side of your bag.
Sorry, I was not educated on how this works.
All right, thank you. If you could, Mr. Chairman, if you could, in FF8, turn to page 44, please. 44. Are you there?
Yes.
Thank you. If you turn over the page 45, that's, is that your signature on that page?
Yes.
That appears to be a letter that you wrote to Mr. T. Gupta.
Sorry.
Oh,
I
sorry,
missed that.
sorry. That appears to be a letter that you wrote to Mr. T. Gupta.
Yes.
And you asked for certain things from him. Can you just briefly state what you wanted from him, which appears at page 46?
Okay. First, maybe what would help
Yes.
is to just itemize some of the things that we had requested, which are contained in the letter.
Yes.
On the first page of that letter, under item 2, under paragraph 2 of the letter. Because we had requested a sworn statement or an affidavit or an attestation or all documents in his possession that he may have had, a written chronology of events, and of course, whatever else that he could have been able to give us. That would have been the theme in the main. But then specifically going to where you are requesting me to go, for the pre-arrival phase, we were requesting Mr. Gupta to answer the following questions. In planning the wedding, which government institutions, agencies and officials did they, meaning the Gupta family, or did he, and any other member of the family approach? And for what purpose and how often did you, meaning them, and any other member of the family approach officials? 2, was it intended that the services you were requesting would be paid for? And then 3, did you request the usage of the blue light in your convoy escort? And then 4, did you make an approach to the Indian High Commission to assist in facilitating landing clearances at Waterkloof Air Base for your chartered aircraft, Jet Airways?
So this approach was sort of a standard approach to all the persons that you were interested in. You would write a letter to them, some of them, and then you would give them a list of questions that you wanted them to answer.
Yes.
And I see at page 47 to 48, that is a response from appears to be a response from, it doesn't say from T. Gupta, but it says the Gupta family.
Yes. But may I just clarify?
Yes.
Not everyone who was invited who was identified to come and testify would have had to be written to. Okay. Because of the time pressures, it was agreed that we could speak to the Directors General and identify people to be invited, especially those that were coming from government. So I just wanted to clarify that aspect. Right. However, even those, some of them, we were able to write to them, those that we had identified early, but if we hadn't identified them early, then we would speak to the DGs to facilitate. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. And then, sorry, you can put the file away now, and we go back to, you can put FF8 away, and then we can go back to the main FF1, Exhibit FF1. You mentioned that, that you had to speak to Ambassador Kolwane. Did you speak to Ambassador Kolwane?
Yes, we did.
How did you invite him?
He was invited through his Director General, Ambassador Majila, at the time. We had met with Ambassador Majila in part in the earlier meeting I spoke about, but we also had met with Ambassador Majila in the actual session because we also had questions for him as the head of department responsible for
yes.
Yeah.
And then when you meet with Ambassador Kolwane, did you have standard questions set for him?
Yes.
And just tell the chairperson about that process. How did you embark on that process?
When we met with Ambassador Kolwane, it must have been on the, I can't remember the exact dates, but I have it in my own notes. But he was invited, and the invite went to his DG, and he then, we got confirmation that he was indeed going to come, and indeed he did come and met with the team where we were stationed.
Okay. And was that the only time you met with him on this matter, or did you subsequently have another meeting with him?
We met Ambassador Kolwane twice. Okay. We met him, can you give me just a few minutes to find it? We met Ambassador Kolwane on the 1st of May, which would have been prior to our appointment when we were meeting as that big meeting, if you recall, that I said
That you
earlier.
mentioned, yes.
And so some of the information we got it from him through that process. And then because we were all there in that meeting, but we hadn't formally been appointed. The second meeting was the meeting that was most important, because when we requested to meet with Ambassador Kolwane, it then turned out that he had been suspended or on some special leave, and so we couldn't meet with him almost immediately. So we met with him only on the 16th of May, when we were finalizing the report, because he was, at some point he was in Durban, and then he was, yeah.
Yes. Then, during this process,
I'm sorry, so does that mean that you didn't have a meeting with him between the date when you were appointed as a team and the date you submitted your report to the ministers?
We did.
You did?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Our report was submitted on the 17th
Oh, okay.
of May.
Okay.
We met with him on the 16th
Okay.
of May.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you, Ms. Chairman. Then, other than interviewing people, did you have any other source of information that you obtained, either from DECO or from Waterkloof Air Force Base, like recordings? Did you listen to any recordings, and if so, what sort of recordings were those?
We, specifically on recordings, yes, we did listen to recordings. There was a recording, I don't know whether it's standard protocol at this point, let me say this, that if it is information that is classified, because I don't know whether it is or it isn't, I don't know what the commission is going to do about that if I'm breaching those classification rules. I saw in the document that you had already requested a release.
Well, Ms. Nomani should know what the position is.
No, just to highlight what recordings, and without giving us the content.
Okay.
Thank you.
It was an audio recording, and I could also set the context of the audio recording. It was an audio recording of telephone conversations between Ambassador Kolwane and Lieutenant Colonel Anderson and Major General Ndisi.
Yes.
Yes.
So those are the recordings you listened to.
Yes.
So then, once you were satisfied that you had made contact or at least interviewed everyone that you thought was necessary to interview or speak to, then you went about, then you sat and you wrote the report.
Yes, but the writing of the report, as we did a section, we would prepare some kind of notes on the pre-arrival, some kind of notes that will guide the final writing of the report. So yes, after we had interviewed everyone, we then finalized the report, because you could almost say it was stage writing, even though the full writing of the report would have been on the last day, but the progressive write-up would have been happening in that context, yes.
Thank you. Did you have any officials who refused to participate in that process? And if there were, can just mention the names.
There were no officials who refused outright. There was an arrangement with Colonel Anderson. Actually, I do apologize. I'm not very good with military titles. So for the record, I don't mean to be disrespectful of her real title, but for the purposes of my response, let me call her Colonel Anderson. So we had made an arrangement for Colonel Anderson to talk to us. We had been to Waterkloof Air Base on the one day to understand the layout and the setup and all of that. However, on the day that the team went to go and speak with her, it may not have been the exact following day, but the day that we as the team were supposed to go and speak with her, she was not available on that day. But she didn't refuse to speak to the team, as far as I'm aware.
Yes, and do you know whether she subsequently met with any members of the team?
Not until the report was written.
Yes, thank you. And then, so you wrote the report, and I see at page 33, you had recommendations, and I would like you to just take the chairperson through those recommendations and your conclusions.
And maybe before she does that, in terms of the people that you interviewed, that you regarded as quite important to interview for purposes of your investigation, I'm sure Ambassador Kolwane was one of them. Would you just identify those that you regarded as important to say, we did interview so-and-so, and those that you regarded as important to interview for purposes of the investigation, and those that circumstances might not have permitted you to interview them, but whose evidence was important that may be submitted affidavits. So it's not everybody that you interviewed or that submitted an affidavit, but those that you regarded as important for the investigation.
Thank you. Those were absolutely necessary to be interviewed would have first and foremost been Ambassador Kolwane. It would have been the Gupta family. It would have been the minister or ministers that were mentioned in the request and in the conversations between Ambassador Kolwane and Colonel Anderson.
The recorded conversation. Are you referring to the recorded conversation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And of course, information that arose from other people we interviewed who confirmed certain discussions. So in the main, those would have been the three. It would have been the presidency, and the presidency for two reasons. One, because there was an ongoing reference to number one or about number one, and so we needed to know what was the story with the reference to number one or about number one. So the rest of the people were important for us to understand as per the first aspect of the terms of reference, to understand how the aircraft landed here. So those I will not go through because they are clearly set out in the report.
But I do think that one of those that you would have regarded as important is the one who would have had the authority to grant permission for the landing at Waterkloof.
Yes.
Yes. Who was that? Was that Ncheche?
Yes, yes. I think it's Major General Ncheche.
Ncheche, yes, and you
yes.
did interview him.
Yes, we did.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon. Could you mentioned the presidency, that you also had to approach the presidency. Did you actually interview the president, former president?
No, we didn't. We did speak to the Director General in the presidency, and we did say the president's name, at least number one, not his name in person, but number one keeps being referred to. We would like to know whether there's an opportunity to have a discussion with him. And as far as the DG then said, is that I think the president was not around or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact detail, but what I do remember, and what we do say in the report, is that the DG was fully aware of what the issues were, and he made himself available to respond to the issues, and he then gave us a written statement to that effect.
Thank you. And at page 33, then you have...
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
That's important. You wanted to interview the president because his name kept on, or rather, reference kept on being made to number one, which you were made to understand was a reference to the president. Is that right?
Yes.
And you did convey your request to the Director General in the presidency that you would like to interview the president.
We conveyed what was coming out, that the president's reference to number 1 was coming up, and we would like to understand what that was about. And the DG in the presidency was quite clear that the president does not deal with those issues. He doesn't grant those permissions and all of those things. And as a result, he, as DG in the presidency, is happy to provide information, which he did. May I also?
Yes.
So,
No,
I do
continue.
apologize.
Maybe what I wanted to ask is what you will deal with just now.
Thank
Yes,
you.
continue.
Thank you so much. May I also add, and perhaps be very categorical about this, because unless I clarify it, it leaves people wondering.
Yes.
With all the people we spoke to, starting with Minister Ben Martins, Ambassador Kolwane, who were the 2 people allegedly who could have spoken to the president. Both of them had said to us, the president did not instruct them, give them any insinuation that he wanted them to facilitate this, and therefore to insist on having to interview the president, unless any one of the 2 in particular, perhaps I could add even the Minister of Defense at the time, did not link the president to the landing of the aircraft. Where number 1 comes through, it's in these telephonic conversations between Ambassador Kolwane and I'm going to say between Ambassador Kolwane, I would hope it's him, but in the telephonic conversation
Yes.
between Ambassador Kolwane and Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Anderson and Major General Ndisi. Yes.
I guess the last point you were adding was that although you may have wished to interview the president, the fact that Ambassador Kolwane and Minister Ben Martins at the time all insisted that the president had not given them any instructions, persuaded you not to insist.
Yes.
That's the point you want to make.
Yes. That's
Okay.
the point I'm making.
Okay.
Thank you.
But in terms of what the Director General in the presidency said, are you okay?
I will be. I do apologize.
Okay. Okay, you must just tell me if you want. You must tell me if you want us to adjourn for a
No.
few minutes. Okay.
I'll be fine. Thank
Okay, all right. Just repeat what the DG in the presidency said. You did say it. I just want to understand it again.
Thank you. The DG in the presidency said, let me step back a bit.
Yes.
When we approached the DG in the presidency, we said one of the things that keeps coming up is number 1. We take it because it's generally understood that number 1 is the president. So we would like to know whether the president has any responsibilities around the landing of the aircraft, because I don't want this thing to be misunderstood as if we were asking whether the president authorized the landing of the aircraft. Our question was whether the president has any responsibilities in law or otherwise to authorize the landing of the aircraft. whether it's the Gupta aircraft or any other aircraft in the Waterkloof Air Base. So that was the context of our question. Thank you.
Well, that distinction may be significant because you were not asking whether at a factual level the president had said anything to anybody or instructed anybody or authorized anybody with or without powers to do so, to do anything. You were asking simply whether in terms of legislation or prescripts there is responsibility on the president with regard to the authorization of the landing of the aircraft.
Yes,
That's an important distinction.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And you say the DG submitted a statement. Did he submit an affidavit or just a statement?
This is the part where my memory fails me, whether it was an affidavit or a statement, but he did submit a document in writing. It was in 2013, so I can't recall everything, but I'm sure that information is available in state security, and we can check that.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify the point we have just dealt with, so you didn't ask the DG to establish whether the president had had any discussions with the people mentioned in, well, with anybody who may have referred to number one in the conversation or whatever. That you didn't ask.
No,
About
we
the
didn't
legal-
ask that question,
Yes.
and let me go further and give the reasons why we didn't ask that question.
Yes.
We didn't ask that question because we ought to have been led to the president directly by someone, not by people who are talking about, but people who we ought to have been led by. As I indicated previously, if Ambassador Kolwane had said, I was instructed by the president, that would have
Then you
led
would
us
have, yes.
to the president.
Yes.
If Minister Martins had said, I was instructed by the president,
Yes.
that would
Then
have
you would
led
have,
us
yes.
to the president.
Yes.
So our view was, what is the basis of us going to
Yes.
ask the
Yes.
president on the basis of people who are just talking between themselves? Telephonically saying the president, number one knows, number one instructed, number one has no problems. That is not, I mean, it's like listening to a gossip somewhere and then going and asking someone who's being gossiped about. So that was the context of the approach we took to say, let's look at officially what could the president do to sanction or authorize the landing. If he has those powers, perhaps we would have then spoken to him and said, in discharging your powers, Mr. President, how did you do it? But we didn't get to that level of inquiry because the point of the discussion ended before we got to that level of inquiry.
Were you at any stage during the investigation aware of any contradictory statements with regard to any one of the people who may have referred to number one in some or other document or statement without disclosing what that source is, or were you not aware of anything like that, where there was one version and there was another and by the same person? I'm not able to speak more freely because because some of the things I don't know what their status is.
Okay. I'm going to
It's difficult.
I'm going to assume that I understand the question and therefore be able to
Yeah,
answer.
yes.
So forgive me if I don't.
I understand that
I
it
would-
might not
I
be
would-
clear. Yeah.
Yes, I would request that
Yeah.
it be asked again.
Yes.
But
Or,
on
or
the-
maybe if this might help, any of the important witnesses, important people that you had identified as important in your investigation, whether any of those who maybe made conflicting statements, not all in writing, maybe one in writing and maybe another not really in writing.
Okay. Conflicting maybe would be taking it too far.
Maybe inconsistent rather than conflicting.
Yes, maybe a
Or not completely.
variation.
Yeah, variation,
Yes,
yes.
a variation of facts, yes.
Yes.
There were definitely a variation of facts
Yes.
from time to time, and I will wish to articulate
Yeah, I
those
think
variations.
we understand each other.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay, yes.
Thank you very much. I would wish to try and articulate those variation of what would otherwise be statement of facts. This wedding party, I don't know whether a wedding is a party, but anyway, this wedding party, originally in February, when the first encounter with South Africa happened, it was a wedding. Where the variation of facts start from this thing being a wedding, to this thing being a delegation, to this thing being likely to be attended, not likely, will be attended by 4 heads of state, and then later by senior ministers in government, and then later it's a delegation as opposed to a wedding. So this thing was very woolly in its real nature. So if that's the question, yes, indeed. We did encounter that, and that was encountered whether through formal discussions with Ambassador Kolwane, or through listening to the recordings, or through talking to other people we interviewed at the Waterkloof Air Base, but in particular through listening to those recordings. Absolutely, yes.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we understood each other. Thank you, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe because you've just mentioned something which just alerted me to what you mentioned in consultation. Are you aware that there were ministers who were invited to the wedding?
Yes, I am aware.
Yes. And could
You mean
just-
South African ministers?
South African ministers, yes.
Yes, I am aware.
Could you just tell the chairperson as to whether you know that there was any decision, because Mr. Ben Martins mentioned that it was decided that the ministers were discouraged actually from attending the wedding. Are you aware of that meeting and how it happened that there was such a meeting and a decision taken in that regard?
It would have been either on the 1st of May, or on the, actually I think it was on the 1st of May. If I'm mistaken about that, I apologize, but 1st or 2nd of May. The meeting that I referred to earlier when I started, the NECOC meeting, where all of us attended. This meeting was a NECOC meeting, but was attended by all JCPS cluster departments. And for the purposes of this session, let me just, I'm not going to itemize all the JCPS cluster departments,
Yes.
but I'm going to itemize a few that are directly relevant. In the JCPS cluster, I'll come back to the question if you don't mind.
No.
In the JCPS cluster is the Department of Justice, it's the Department of State Security, it's the Department of Defense, Police, Home Affairs, DERCO, and then, and SARS, specifically SARS. And then there are many others that play a supportive role. So the ministers of the JCPS cluster would talk regularly on issues of security, and therefore the DGs will talk regularly. But the core line function is that of state security, which is delivered under NCOC. Now, in terms of that, NCOC would have convened this meeting as their line function, as responsible for state security. But in inviting this meeting, they then extended it to members of the JCPS cluster, which is why I was there present in that meeting. In the meeting, many things were discussed. In fact, if you don't mind, I want to just try and get to it. So now I must go to your own referencing for the purposes of your document.
If you tell her what you are looking for, she might assist you.
I'm almost there,
yes.
DCJ. On page 17, no, on page 21 of your reference.
Oh, okay, that is Exhibit 1, FF1.
Yes.
Yes.
Is it 21? Just bear with me.
Okay.
Almost there. Okay, it's on NS 20.
All right. Then page 20, yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So on NS 20, these were the decisions that were taken by that meeting, that broad meeting. It was quite a big meeting. That the Directors General should advise their ministers against attending this wedding in Sun City. It was almost common cause that most ministers, I wouldn't say all of them, but most ministers, and in particular most senior ministers, had been invited to this wedding. So the conclusions of that meeting was to encourage ministers not to attend the wedding, especially given the environment that had just unfolded. Okay. Yes. Okay. There were many other decisions that were taken at that meeting, and I don't know whether you would wish me to deal with all of them, or you wanted just that one.
No, I wanted just that one because it's relevant to what we're dealing with. Could you then turn to the page where, having gathered now all the facts and the information, having drafted the report, then you reached a point where you said, now we can make recommendations. And could you just take us through those? And that would be
Don't you want her to deal with the findings they made before the recommendations?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, at page 28. Page 28, the findings are there. Could you just deal with those? Thank you. Paragraph 4.
Okay.
You could just summarize.
You do not need to read all of this or to mention all of them because the report is there.
Yes.
We are able to read it, but you can highlight those findings that you believe are important among the findings that you made.
Okay, thank you. The findings that we made were as follows. Of course, the airports company was correct in not yielding to the request of the Gupta family. That if and when the Gupta family realized that going through a relationship issue, in other words, going and talking to the minister and saying, number one knows it and those kinds of things, did not work, they then opted to use a formal process, which would have required a note verbal and all of that, and we found that there was no formal note verbal, and it is confirmed, and it was confirmed at the time by the people who would otherwise have dealt with the note verbal if they had received it, that there was no note verbal that was received. So that was the first finding that we made.
Again, just on the note verbal, I think you did say, and other witnesses said, I think yesterday, that was a requirement that had to be received. It had to be received by Waterkloof from DERCO, is that correct?
No.
Or Department of Defense from DERCO?
No, a note verbal would have been initiated by a requesting country.
Oh, yes.
So in this
to
particular
DERCO.
case, it would have been India,
Yes.
requesting South Africa to
Yes.
allow the delegation landing.
Yes.
Generally, a note verbal would not be for private matters.
Yes.
It would be for public,
State.
or official, if I may call it that, official trips or arrangements.
Yes.
And therefore, if this was regarded as a formal, official state visit, it would have required a note verbal.
Or that would come from the foreign government, India in this case.
Into DERCO.
And it would be directed to DERCO.
Yes.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, yes.
So that was not there, that was one of your findings?
Yes, definitely. It wasn't there. And even the Indian High Commission confirmed that, that it was not done. They said it was an oversight.
Did you, I know you're still going to deal with other findings that you regard as important, did you get to understand about how long before the arrival of an aircraft that would be carrying a head of state or deputy head of state would not a verbal be sent? Did you get an idea what the practice is? I would have imagined that it should come quite well in advance normally.
I am not responding from this investigation necessarily,
Yes.
but when a country is invited or a request is being made to a country for something to happen, it's given quite in advance.
Yes.
And so, and these are not the timelines from the protocols. I cannot recall what the
Yeah.
timelines were, but I
Yes.
would imagine it would be a period longer than 3 months.
Yes, and I would imagine that somebody at DERCO who normally deals with that, if he was made to understand or she was made to understand that there was a state visit, that must be the first thing he or she would be looking for before doing anything else.
Absolutely,
Yes, thank you.
absolutely. Thank you. So that would have been the first issue that we found. The second, we went through the approval processes, as I indicated, the protocols and all of that. In no area in the relevant protocols did we find space for ministers to approve or sanction the landing of the aircraft. It's purely a formal a process that is undertaken by officials to allow for the landing of the aircraft, because they would have looked at what is required for the aircraft, what is required for a delegation, and then they will give the necessary approval. And that responsibility fell under the portfolio whose owner was at that time Ambassador Ambassador Kolwan.
Yes.
The third issue was obviously the correct clearance is only insofar as the military base. We found that there were clearances, but I don't want these clearances to be confused with the foreign operator's permit, because the foreign operator's permit was not there. But the foreign operator's permit would have applied if this aircraft would have landed at OR Tambo. In the Waterkloof Air Base, what was relevant would have been the approvals that Major General Ncheche would have had to sign off, and then the aircraft would be able to land. Obviously, he wouldn't do that out of context. He would receive information from DERCO. He would use that information to then approve the landing. And from our investigations and our discussions with Major General Ncheche, what we discovered was that he was quite a prudent person. He asked several questions that were relevant as to why is the wedding party. We are not allowed to make the wedding party land here, and this is an official business, and I mean, this is an area where only official business of government and official delegations of government would land, and many other things that he said. So we found him to be very robust in how he ultimately discharges his responsibility. But I guess with the persuasion from, I don't know whether I would say his seniors or otherwise, he ultimately granted the necessary clearances.
Okay.
We also found that not only was the aircraft that landed was given permission to land, but there were other supporting aircraft, the fixed wings and helicopters that were also allowed to land at the airbase, and which would ordinarily not be normal, but it was done.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I see the time is 1:15.
Yes, I was also looking, but maybe let her finish the important, mentioning the important findings, and then we'll take the tea break.
As Chair, please. Thank you.
Yes,
Yes, thank you.
continue.
Okay, I am not going to cover all of them then in that case, but
Yes, only those that you think are important to articulate. Otherwise, we've got the report.
Okay.
Those that you think are important to articulate,
All right.
feel free to articulate them.
Okay, perhaps the other finding that you will not see in the report, it's because at the time it was felt that it would be sensitive because it would impact on diplomatic relations, and that would have been the role that was played by the High Commission, the Indian High Commission. I wish not to speak at length because I'm not advised on how I deal with those issues here.
Okay.
The only thing I would like to say is that we did find that some of the actions of the High Commission were consistent with the willingness of how this trip or wedding party was defined from time to time, depending on the circumstances. Thank you.
I'll put this question and you can indicate whether you feel comfortable to respond to it. Did the picture that emerged from your investigation suggest that either the High Commissioner or somebody or some people within that office may have facilitated or may have done things not in the way that was expected of them in regard to the process that ended up in the landing of this aircraft at Waterkloof. You can indicate if the question is one that you would rather deal with after getting advice.
Okay. To the extent that this was a wedding, pure wedding, the diplomatic pleasantries that were being requested were not consistent with what would ordinarily be requested.
Okay.
If I may leave it
Okay.
at that.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe you might want to highlight what you've found in paragraph 4.8 at page 29.
We found that the Ambassador Kolwane and Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, in facilitating this lending, ignored a whole range of things that they knew needed to exist before this lending was permissible. We found that. And we also found that they were aware, and maybe not so much Anderson as much as Ambassador Kolwane, and I will clarify briefly. The fact that this was so wholly being a delegation and is one classical example that tells us that there was something amiss in this whole process. Secondly, in the recordings that we had access to, the conversations between the two and the conversations between Anderson and DC clearly indicate what ought to have happened in terms of what kind of lending, what kind of permission would have had to be given. Retract. Would permission have been given if this was just a pure wedding? The answer is no. And DC makes it very clear that the answer is no. And therefore, and they knew it, which is why they would then gravitate from a VVIP, their ministers, their presidents, and all of those things. So there was serious knowledge of what was going on. What I certainly personally can say with sufficient confidence, because I didn't speak to Colonel Anderson, would be whether this relationship of common knowledge was equal between the two parties. That I can say. Yes.
Is the position that the team or yourself were quite clear that, for example, in the case of Ambassador Kolwane, he knew exactly what the true nature of this trip was, but misrepresented to other people what it was? Was that either one of the findings you made, or if you didn't make, was that a view you came to quite clearly?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
You might also want to refer to paragraph 4.13 at page 30.
Sorry, 4.?
4.13, 4.13 at page 30.
Yes.
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 Yes, could you just tell the chairperson, summarize what you found there in that paragraph? Sorry.
So what we found was that obviously the Chief of State Protocol was working very closely with Colonel Anderson, Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, in facilitating this. And in calling Surgeon Major DC to get the necessary approvals done, basically. So what we found was they really did more than what they were required to do to ensure that this lending happened. Almost going so far as ignoring the rules and the protocols that are put there for this thing to happen.
And you also found in 4.15 that there was somewhat abuse of higher office.
Yes. There was, as I indicated earlier, that there were references to the president, well, number one, let me not say the president, number one. And we say this was abuse because, at least not so much for Anderson, but at least for Ambassador Kolwane, we interviewed him and he denied having been instructed, but by number one.
Was Colonel Anderson male? or
Female.
Oh, okay. all right.
Female.
Or you say you interviewed Ambassador Kolwane?
Yes,
And he denied
having been instructed
by
by the
yeah.
president. Yes. Sorry, I lost
You were
the
dealing,
question.
you were dealing with the abuse of higher office.
Yes, yes.
So, yes, thank you very much. So what we found was that this reference to number one knows the minister is okay with it, meaning the Minister of Defense is okay with it. The Minister of Transport has been instructed by number one. When we interviewed the Minister of Transport, and through his own statement, he clearly said number one did not instruct him. When we interviewed, unfortunately, Minister Mapisa Ngakula at the time was not available, but her advisor, Mr. Rama, I can't remember what his name was.
Ramakgoba.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was very forthcoming with information and participated fully and gave us all the information. And we were satisfied that Minister Mapisa Ngakula, who was the Minister of Defense at the time, did not authorize this landing, did not want anything to do with it. And as a result, this assertion that they were okay with it was not true. So they were using the power of the office of the minister to say the minister is okay so that this thing can happen, so that the junior officials can make it happen. The Minister of Transport has been instructed by the president so that the junior officials can kind of get a picture that there was activity high up the ladder, and therefore they needed to do something. And so we felt that was abusing the position, almost the positions of power of these people that I have identified, at least to, specifically in relation to the three, Minister Mapisa Ngakula, Minister Ben Martins, and the President. Thank you.
And your understanding was that these statements that number one or the president knew this or had given instructions, and that Minister Mapisa Ngakula had authorized this, did you conclude that they were made by somebody who knew that that was not the case?
Absolutely.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Michelle. And then we made a finding, sorry, again, at paragraph 4.22. I would like you to make reference to that, please. That's at page 32.
You said 4?
4.22. Yes. Could you just highlight that, because it's relevant for our purposes?
Okay. I had indicated earlier that there were a number of aircrafts that had been there, other than the main commercial aircraft, and none of these aircrafts were funded by SANDF and SABS as far as we could find in the information that we were given. But they were definitely there at the Waterkloof Air Base.
Yes. And you say that they were funded by the Gupta family?
Yes.
In that funding?
Yes.
And then you also deal with the BMWs that were used in the convoy?
Yes.
Yes. What do you say about them then?
They were all the vehicles, other than, of course, the police vehicles that would have gone through the normal joints operation. All the vehicles were funded, were privately funded by the Gupta family.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
I see also in page 33, paragraph 4.24, that you made this finding, that it was commendable notwithstanding the manipulation by a few that public servants in the affected government departments and structures raised concerns without fear, favor, or prejudice, some of them repeatedly, as to what was transpiring. However, their concerns were neither addressed nor acted upon by those in positions of authority over them, bent on manipulating the system. You confirm that that's one of your findings?
Yes, and it is in the context that I had indicated, where in particular, Ncheche, again, I can't remember the title.
Yes, Jesse, yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
had said, we are not allowed to do this. The rules don't allow us to do this. And the responses, and this is through the recorded conversation, the audio conversation, that he was told it doesn't matter the reason. If DERCO approves, we can do it. Now, a Department of Defense, as far as I understand, having worked for government, has its own protocols, and the Department of DERCO has its own protocols. So you have to first stick within your own protocols
Yes.
before you can take instructions from an external department, even if the working relationship is tight. First, you are guided by your own protocols, first and foremost.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Then
you.
if those are the important
main-
findings,
yes.
but I don't know if you have any, then we can take the break, and then when we
Deal
come
with the
back, then
recommendations.
she can deal with recommendations and
And
any
conclusion.
other matters that she might consider important.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, but on findings, is there
That,
anything?
no, no, I think she's highlighted most, all of those that are quite critical.
Ms. Ndane, on findings, are you done in terms of the important ones you would like to highlight? If there is any that you haven't, you can mention it, or we can start with it when we come back from tea.
Yes, I think I'm done.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. We'll take the tea adjournment and we'll resume at 11:45. We adjourn.
As a please, thank you.
Okay, let's
Thank you.
proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sindane, could you then deal with the recommendations at page 33?
Thank you very much. The first recommendation was that
I'm sorry, before you start on the recommendations, it's quite clear from what you have said and from the report that whatever process or procedure was applied to try and legitimize the landing of this report, of this aircraft, those processes were not applicable to it, and it should never have been authorized. Is that correct?
yes, that was our
Yes.
finding.
Because it did not meet the requirements for an aircraft to qualify to land at Waterkloof.
Yes.
Okay. Yes,
thank
you can then
Yes,
deal with the recommendations.
Thank you.
Okay. Because there were many investigations that were happening concurrently, we recommended that those investigations be finalized soonest, and that action be taken against any and all of the people who may have contravened weather legislation, internal protocols, and all of that in relation to this landing. And if there were any matters of a criminal nature, that those also be dealt with. On the issue of the Waterkloof Air Base, it being a national key point, I mean, it had been in the media a lot at that point, where people were thinking that the Waterkloof Air Base is a national key point. At that time, it was not. I think it still is not a national key point, but it's a strategic defense installation, and because of that, we recommended that it stay as such, because it plays a very specific role for the Defense Department, but it also plays a very specific role for the heads of state. And we recommended that it be kept as such. And then, this may sound like a very light recommendation, 5.3, and may I spend just a minute or two on it. We recommended here that the public service must do something to deal with this issue of name dropping, because it is dangerous for government and for the country. We were in this embarrassing situation precisely because people use people's names, titles, to achieve objectives that would otherwise not been possible to achieve if it is not because of the name that is being used. In this particular case, we were specific. We were referring to the use of the name of Minister Ben Martins as being okay with this, the use of the name of the Minister of Defense being okay with this, the use of number one knowing about this. Because, and this I need to explain, in the public sector, and in particular government, people use ministers' names, DG's names a lot, and a lot of damage happens. And if this is not attended to, it may sound for an ordinary person who is not in government, may not understand the implications. But there were people who did something wrong because they genuinely believed that either number one was okay with this, either the ministers were okay with this. And they acted genuinely believing that to be true. Now, this does not end here in this investigation. It may come up in other investigations because these things happen all the time in government. And that is why we were recommending, and we felt if it's not addressed, it will continue and ultimately we will be embarrassed as a country. And so that was the third.
Well, let's
yes.
talk about that just a little bit.
Thank you.
When I read you that recommendation, I wasn't sure whether labeling this conduct as what happened here, what seems to have happened here in terms of the evidence that was presented to you, was name dropping in the sense, at least in which I understand name dropping. You know, the impression I get when I read your report, and I think that that also comes through in your evidence, is that certain people who knew what the true facts were deliberately misrepresented facts. Now, I'm not sure that that's name dropping. Maybe it is. My understanding of name dropping is something along these lines, but I can't say it's the only case of name dropping, is that if I talk to you, maybe I need something, I just find a way of making sure that you know that I know so and so, and maybe we are close. That I know, if you know I know that person and we are close, that might change your view as to my request, or the way you will look at me is going to be different from the way you were looking at me before you knew of my relationship with so and so. Now, maybe it does fall within, but as I understand here, somebody from your evidence, I think you have made it quite clear that on your investigations revealed that Ambassador Kolwane, at least on his version that he told you, he had said, as I understand it, he had said that number one knew about this. He had said that number one had instructed Minister Ben Martins. He had said Minister Mapisa Ngakula authorized or something to that effect. But what emerged is that he knew, or at least what he told you is that that was not the case. So if he accepted that he had made those statements and he then said to you, I actually wasn't telling the truth in saying that number one knew about it and that number one had instructed Minister Ben Martins and whatever else, then it would seem to have been a deliberate misrepresentation of facts, which under the public service ought to and can be dealt with in terms of discipline in a serious way. So I'm just mentioning this. I don't know whether you would say it's still name dropping, or maybe what you were sensing when you say people might think it's a minor recommendation. Maybe it reflects what the impression I also got, that it's name dropping. But I was saying it's a misrepresentation of facts, knowing that you are misrepresenting them and using the names of people in high authority in that situation where you know you shouldn't be doing that. That was my impression. So I don't know if you have got any comments, but as I say, it may be that it is name dropping, Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the chair's reading is correct. But I think I would like to add, the reading, your interpretation absolutely, Honorable Judge, Deputy Chief Justice, is quite correct. First, there must be facts to be misrepresented. In this particular case, the facts are not borne out by any of the evidence we found. In other words, there were no facts whether the number one knew about this or at least sanctioned it or instructed anybody. There were no facts. Neither were there facts that Minister of Defense was okay with this. Neither were facts whether the then Minister of Transport had been instructed. So you can't even misrepresent that because there were no facts as a starting point. But I agree.
Well, look at it this way. From the point of view of Ambassador Kolwane, from what he told you and from what emerged from the evidence, he did not know and was not aware of any fact that number one had instructed Minister Ben Martins in regard to this issue, and he did not know that Minister Mapisa Nagula had authorized this landing, at least from what emerged in your investigation. Nevertheless, he misrepresented his knowledge. He represented that he knew that these facts existed. You understand?
I agree.
Yeah, okay.
I agree. Let me therefore go back to name dropping. I think the summation as presented from the chair is a correct one in terms of name dropping. But we were saying something, probably we were poorer for words, but this is what we meant.
But also you had to do all of this in a very short time.
Yes.
And I take it you were still having your other normal responsibilities as DGs of various departments.
Yes. So yes, I agree. But I just want to clarify this, because it is true that certain officials at a particular level will act in a particular way if you say either the minister is aware or the minister desires this or that. And this is what we are saying. Perhaps it may not be an accurate formulation that we chose at the time, but this is what we are communicating. We were communicating then, and we are communicating through this report as a public document, that if this is not addressed, where people can just use people's names, because sometimes they use your name and you end up in trouble. Because, let me use a practical example. If someone, and I was a DG at the time, went to another and said, the DG said, appoint somebody. A junior official, if there was an interview process, would think that I want that person appointed. And so sometimes you can be in trouble for things you had nothing to do with. And that is very common. And that's the point we were making. That if it is not addressed, it puts people in trouble, it makes innocent people act wrongly simply because they believe authority wants these things to be done. And that's the context of that recommendation we were making. Thank you.
No, I understand that. But I take it that you may have wanted something specific because it's not as if people who do that can't be dealt with in terms of what exists, because if you are DG and some director goes to somebody in the department and say the DG said this is what must be done, when you didn't say that, that's a false statement. And if that person knows that you didn't say that, it's dishonesty. There are ways of dealing with that.
Okay.
So I take it that you might have wanted something specific to name dropping, but not because this kind of conduct cannot be dealt with within the existing framework.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And maybe is that, just following up on the chair's last question, is that the reason why you recommended, in addition, if we could just deal with that at page 34, as to how you wanted this whole issue of name dropping, how you wanted it to be dealt with? The sentence begins with "in addition."
Yes, yes. We wanted it to be specified because we felt that misconduct is a very broad category of offenses. And you want to narrow some of those offenses to something specific. Because if you narrow it to something specific, then people's attention will be brought specifically to this, to say, if I do this, it in itself is now an offense or under public service, rather than putting it under a generic category of misconduct which already exists. And of course, perhaps we said this because what we saw, we felt it could never have happened had senior names not have been used. Maybe it could have, I don't know. But we thought at the time it could never have happened if senior names had not been used.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And then you have your conclusions in Chapter 6. Could you just summarize what you concluded?
Our conclusion was, as guidance has been given from the Chair, was that in this particular transaction, or in this particular, I don't know whether it was a transaction, but in this particular event, I withdraw transaction. In this particular event, there was lack of professionalism in how people dealt with their responsibilities. And what we were encouraging people to do is to deal with these issues and report them where, for instance, if things like these happen. So because otherwise, if people have to endure undue influence, they are not able to do their work objectively. So that was the point that we were trying to make in that statement. And we then concluded perhaps that some of the behaviors that were displayed during this whole process could almost be unethical, could almost be a lack of ascribed to lack of professionalism, or if not, then I would even argue it was outright reckless in how this was undertaken. But we also noted that sometimes the public, when the public is outraged by something, and as having been a senior official in government for many, many years, sometimes you're like, oh my God. But the reality of the matter is that unless our public is enraged enough, nothing happens. And it was good in a bad way that the public was so enraged about this thing. And because of that, action was taken. And I am not, please let me be understood correctly, I am not talking about action, disciplinaries everywhere, because I would not know whether that was taken or not. Our interaction with this work ended when we said, here is the report, it's now yours, you do what you have to do. And we moved out of it. It's no longer our report as it is, as it sits here. And then also and this and I read in the media subsequent to this report that people were making very light of the fact that they are indeed good, hard-working, honest and dedicated officials in government. And in this particular case, we picked that up so clearly. It was so unequivocal that there were people who were asking the right questions. But I think either because of the rush of the moment, and I don't want to assume, because this we did not find. We did not find anything that was of a direct personal benefit to any of the two people. We did not find that, and we are not making any assumptions, express or otherwise, that they did get any direct benefit. We are not making that finding. But we are saying how the other officials dealt with this was, in our view, very acceptable, in the fact that they raised questions, they kept on raising questions, and how the people who were making this lending to happen were doing it. They were either pressured by things we don't know because they never told us. But that pressure may have been too much for them, but unless they share, or unless they shared at the time with the task team what the pressure was and the source of the pressure was, we do not understand how, and we couldn't understand it then, how they could have formulated, there's a wedding, there's a delegation, there are heads of states, there are ministers, and then it turns out there are no ministers, there are no heads of state, it's some MECs. How did that happen? What was the source of the pressure? And unless they themselves told us that this was the pressure point, and that is why we probably, in a woolly kind of way, formulated this to end up the way it did.
Thank you. You've mentioned the public outrage, but did this incident on its own rattle government at all? You were there, you would have seen and maybe even experienced as a senior official at the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Government was rattled to a point that I hadn't seen in my experience in government until that point. Other things that are big would be major disasters and all of that. I'm not comparing this to that, absolutely, by any means. But government was so rattled by this thing. I had never been in meetings where there were so many senior officials of government in one meeting and or the other for like hours on end discussing one thing. So I think government was very rattled. Did we learn something out of this? I probably would say we could have learned something if action was taken. I don't know what action was taken as I sit here, and therefore I don't know whether we learned enough to prevent this thing from recurring into the future.
Yes. Thank you. And then when you concluded then your report, who did you hand it to?
To the principals that had appointed us, who would be the JCPS cluster ministers.
Yes. Is it correct that it was published on the website?
It was published on the same day, and I think a hard copy was also delivered to the Public Protector's Office.
Yes. And from the time you had written this report, were you ever made aware of any person bringing applications to have it set aside or reviewed, or any action against it?
I was not aware of any application setting the report aside. I was, however, aware that I really want to cite her correctly this time. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson had raised issues. Now, I don't know whether she went to court necessarily because I don't know how she raised those issues. I do know that she went to the public protector at the time.
Yes, thank you. And you satisfied, you're happy with the report, and you stand by your findings and recommendations in it?
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
You didn't interview Colonel Anderson, or did you?
No.
Why not?
There was an arrangement, maybe to explain this, we went to the airbase on, say, day one or whatever the day was. We went on the airbase just to see, almost like an in-loco, just to see what was going on, the layout and all of that. And once we had done that, we identified people that we wanted to speak to. They were organized for us to speak to them. I think subsequent to that, we went again and we discussed with a whole range of officials at the airbase. And then there was a follow-up meeting to meet with Lieutenant Colonel Anderson. And I wasn't going to be there on that day, but I was advised by the three members of the team who went there to interview her that she was not available.
Until you finished
Until we
the
concluded.
investigation.
Yes.
Okay. Former Minister Ramatloti gave evidence earlier this year here, and in his evidence he touched on the issue of the landing of the aircraft at Waterkloof. I don't want to put words into his mouth, but my understanding of his feeling about this incident was something along the lines that it shocked him, and he referred to what it said to people like him who had even gone out of the country to fight for freedom. And my understanding was that he was expressing the sentiment that this brought shame to some of us to have a private, a commercial plane landing at such a strategically important base in our country. And he seemed really to find the whole incident quite shocking, and I put my own words, like something that we maybe as a country should see as something that brought national shame. I'm just using my own words based on what I understood him to be saying. Having conducted this investigation and heard from different people how it came about, are you able to describe what your own feeling was about this incident once you had gathered all the information that you had gathered? How you would describe it?
It's a big question.
Okay. I just want to have an understanding of how bad you or your committee thought it was. You might not be able to speak for others in the committee, but for yourself. Once the picture emerged through the investigation, how you saw it.
Okay. I will speak for myself, not for the committee.
Yes, yes.
As the senior civil servant at that time, and a South African, I was extremely embarrassed. And the embarrassment was not that something like that happened. The embarrassment was, how could a wedding of people who are not from the country take place, a wedding party, land in a strategic installation? What went wrong? Where were we, including myself? Of course, I would never have known anything about it at a technical level, but that was the question I was left with. What went wrong? Where was I? I mean, I'm a convener of the JCPS cluster. How could we not have seen this coming? Why was this so difficult to spot? So one, it was embarrassing. But two, it was also disappointing. It was extremely disappointing because you would imagine that such a strategic installation is not so easily accessible. Where I think perhaps my biggest shock, but I know this because a lot of people were shocked by this, but where my biggest shock was, why are we even in this wedding? Never mind everything else. Why is this wedding such a national important event in our calendar? So for me, those were the questions. I accept that there are relations, cabinet members are entitled to have relations with whomsoever they choose, but when it gets to this point where national assets are abused to that level, it's a shock. And it's particularly a shock because people get fired for the smallest things. And for something this big, I mean, I'm disappointed today as I was disappointed when this thing happened. And I even wonder, because obviously we were just oblivious going on about our responsibilities. If the media had not picked this thing up, it would have gone on and nobody would have been the wiser. And so that's what shocks me and shocked me at that point, but still makes me very disappointed, even as I sit here, that sometimes I'm no fan of the media, and not that I hate the media, but but that's that. But the long and the short of it, if no one had picked this up, it could easily have gone on. Yes.
You mentioned something along the lines that people get fired for small things. I thought you didn't finish that sentence. I thought there's a point you wanted to make. Do you want to make the point?
The point I'm trying to get to is, yeah, that's the point. I lack the words to say the point. But here is perhaps what I'm trying to get to. At a personal level, I have disciplined employees for the simplest things and fired them. And without being excited about having fired them, I reflected and I said it was a good decision. They may not feel the same way, by the way, but...
Sorry, what was a good decision? You mean the employees?
That an employee was fired.
Okay.
So I would say...
Or you mean when you have made a decision to fire an employee for whatever reason, the employee might not feel the same way you feel, but you might look at principle, you might look at a number of factors and say it was a good decision.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
So, but on this thing that brought the country to a standstill, I know of no one who was acted against or acted upon as a result of this. And that's all I wish to say.
And acted upon, you mean fired, as you have just been making
Yes.
examples of being fired?
Yes.
Well, I thought that was the point you wanted to make. I'm glad that I saw the point. Are you done?
Yes, just one question, Mr. Chairman. At our consultation, you raised something. You reacted. You mentioned that the author of the book, The President's Keepers, Mr. Jacques Paul, I think it is page 268, I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman, had indicated that because of how this report was done, you were actually rewarded, and you had a comment to make to that. Could you just tell the chairperson what your understanding was about what the author was saying about you, and then give your comment to that?
Okay.
Thank you.
The President's Keepers, when it probably was on the same day that it was released that I started getting calls, SMSs and those kinds of things, WhatsApp messages. Someone even sent me a book because of how the thing was mentioned, the investigation was mentioned. But if you go back to the book, the title of the book says it's the President's Keepers, or whatever the right formulation is. So what offended me about that, which is still offending me as I sit here, is that you use the information as though you have either verified with me or that kind of thing. When you write a statement like the statement he wrote about us being rewarded for having done this. Now, here is the deal, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dlomo is now an ambassador in a country I don't know. Dr. Clint Swema is in the UN somewhere. And who else? Commissioner Moyane, until recently, he had moved on to SARS from being a commissioner in correctional services. So perhaps one could say maybe that's what he meant. And of course, I went to the private sector a few years after that, after either some of the promotions or all of the promotions. I joined a company which had no business in being drawn into this thing of President's Keepers. So I felt that statement had an impact on the business and the company that I work for, which incidentally I'm also a small shareholder in. And I felt it was not right for him to have done that, though I understood that the media normally can say things and kind of get away with them. So I understood that, but I am still feeling very aggrieved, and I want to put it on record, and thanks for the question, because I want to put it on record. I am not a President's keeper. I did not defend the president. There may have been errors in the process, but I did not defend the president when I compiled the report. I participated in the process. There was no link that was given by, in particular, one person, but maybe two. One, Minister Ben Martins, who was the Minister of Transport at the time, denied categorically having been instructed by the president. Two, the Ambassador Kolwane denied having been instructed by the president. I and my team could not have gone to the president and say, Mr. President, we had some skinner somewhere there and we think we must now come and talk to you. What we decided to do, which was procedural, was to go to the presidency and say, under which protocols can the president, if any, authorize the landing of the aircraft? Because if we had received that, we possibly could have had a direct link to the president in terms of saying, Mr. President, this is the protocol, this is what you did. In the absence of that, and in the absence of the link from the people we interviewed, there was no way, as I sit here today, reflecting on something that happened in 2013, there was no way that a right-thinking person would have said, okay, there were people who were talking and we are now talking to you about this. And so I am not the president's keeper. I resent the connotation associated with that. Even though some of the information came from our website, the tone that it was put in our website and the tone that it is used in that book, in my view, is intended or was intended or continues to be intended as the book continues to be read to diminish the role I played in this investigation, and perhaps me as an individual.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for record purposes, that those remarks about you are at page 153 of the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. Thank you. Thank you. That is all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ndane, for having come to give evidence to the Commission. Thank you very much. Should the need arise for you to be asked to come back, the Commission will be in touch with you. There may or may not be somebody who might want to apply for leave to cross-examine you. We don't know at this stage. So, but in that event, you will be contacted. But thank you very much for coming forward.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that
And you are
opportunity.
excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next witness will be Major Ncheche, and he will be led by my learned friend, Ms. Rasivichel. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Just, I mentioned it. I've got it.
I'm going to adjourn for 5 minutes. We adjourn.
Good day, Chair.
Yes. Are you ready?
Indeed so, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, I'll be leading the evidence of Major Thabo Ncheche, who at the time of the landing of the chartered commercial aircraft at the Air Force Base Waterkloof on the 30th of April 2013 was a warrant officer stationed at the Air Force Command Post. The Air Force Command Post, as relayed to me by Major Ncheche, is the heart of the Air Force and a critical channel wherein the necessary authorization is given in order for an aircraft to land at the base. The second witness is Mr. William Majila, employed at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and for all intents and purposes, I will be mentioning it as DIRCO. Mr. Majila, at the time of the landing, acted in the capacity of...
But are we not having Mr. Ncheche's evidence at the moment?
Yes, indeed so, sir. This is just a relay, just to bring to the Chair's attention concerning Mr. Majila's affidavit, which is a confirmatory affidavit. Just to give a short background to the circumstances leading
Now,
to...
let's hear Mr. Ncheche's evidence at the moment.
As the Chair pleases.
Yeah. I see two people
Yes.
there. What is going on?
Chair, Mr. Major Ncheche, I beg your pardon, has requested an interpreter to accommodate him in isiZulu, his home language. And for all intents and purposes, I'm not certainly sure, my mistake, that I haven't received the interpreter's name. Apologies for that. That he will relay the evidence to Mr. Ncheche, who will then reply in isiZulu.
Is the interpreter a sworn translator?
Yes.
Yes, Chairperson.
You are.
Yes, I am a sworn interpreter.
Okay. Ms. Norman, have you checked all of those things, those formalities?
Yes, Chair, we did check with Mr. Moloko, who is within the Secretariat.
Yes, but has anybody got that as a matter of fact, that what I'm being told is true?
Yes, I would have no reason to... In fact, I know the interpreter.
You know him?
Yes, I have dealt with him before. And Mr. Moloko did also check all of those credentials, yes.
Yeah, with the paperwork and everything.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about.
I do not have paperwork, Mr. Chairman,
But did somebody check that?
yes, we could ask that be obtained, yes.
Yes. Let's start
Yes.
with that.
Thank you.
Please stand, Mr. Interpreter. What are your full names?
Our full names are Stanley Dumsane Nisi.
Nessie.
Yes.
You say you are a sworn interpreter,
I'm a sworn interpreter.
and you can make arrangements to produce the necessary documentation.
The necessary documentations, I think, are with Mr. Moloko.
Or you provided them?
Yes, Lord.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. Then I'm happy. Okay, thank you. And of course, I take it that you interpret from isiZulu to English and vice versa.
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay, then
Thank
let's go. Let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, if I may refer you to the following exhibits that will be used with Major Ncheche's evidence.
Yes.
The following exhibit in consecutive order is Exhibit FF4. That would be the Chief SANDF Board. On the spine, it is written case number 01/2013.
Yes.
The next exhibit is FF5. It's on the spine, it's written email reference bundle.
Yes.
And then Exhibit FF6, which comprises of both affidavits of Major Ncheche and Mr. Majila, which is labeled Exhibit FF 6.1 and Mr. Majila Exhibit FF 6.3.
Well, let's deal with Mr. Ncheche only now.
Indeed so, Chair.
Yeah, isn't Mr. Machela going to give evidence later?
Yes, indeed, Chair. However, Mr. Majila's affidavit is actually a confirmatory affidavit.
Yes, but will he not be called?
Our view as the team, Chair, is that Mr. Majila's affidavit is a confirmatory affidavit to Ms. Sindani's annexure, which would be the JS report about the landing, the cluster report. And we felt that there was nothing contentious about, he agrees with everything according to
Well, I
as he's
just said
mentioned.
last week that I decide whether a witness will be called or will not be called.
Of course, based on
Nobody has
the
come to me
Chair's
and
approval.
said there is this witness, this is the nature of his or her evidence. We propose not to call him and hear what I have to say.
Indeed so, Chair. That was just our recommendation
That's
based
the
on your
process to
approval.
be followed.
Indeed so, Chair.
Okay, I
Thank you,
think for
Chair.
now, let's focus on Mr. Ncheche's evidence, and whatever else in relation to another witness can be dealt with later.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
And finally, Chair, Exhibit FF8, that would be on the spine. It is written
Yes, I've got
additional
it.
information bundle.
Yes. What are the contents of Exhibit FF4? Is it the report of the Board of Inquiry?
Yes, indeed. So it predominantly deals with the Board of Inquiry. It's got statements, also a transcript, and also other annexures based on the Board of Inquiry's investigations as well.
The Liver Arch file, which contains documents relating to the Board of Inquiry of the SNDF, with a sworn statement, an affidavit by Mr. Mkwebi, will be marked Exhibit FF4, and the Liver Arch file containing emails, written emails reference bundle, will be marked Exhibit FF5. I think we had entered Exhibit 8, FF8, Ms. Norman?
Yes, we did.
We did, yeah. And we entered Exhibit FF6 yesterday when I had the evidence of Mr. Martins. Yeah, I think that takes care of everything.
Thank you, Chair. If the Chair is
Are you
satisfied,
ready?
may the witness please be sworn in.
Will you administer the oath to the witness or affirmation? If there's going to be a need for the interpretation of the oath, the interpreter will interpret, but Mr. Ncheche will indicate if he doesn't need interpretation for that part, or he says he doesn't. Okay.
Please state your full names for the record.
Igama lami nguThabo Ncheche.
Do you have any objections to making the prescribed affirmation?
No.
Do you solemnly affirm that all the evidence that you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "I truly affirm."
I truly affirm.
Thank you very much. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Major Ncheche, in front of you, you have a presentation file with Exhibit FF6 in front of you, is that correct?
Yes.
Phambi kwakho unezimpepha ke ezobufakazi ezibhalwe u-exhibit FF6 kunjalo?
Kunjalo.
That is correct.
Major Ncheche, can you please just turn to page 1?
Ungavula ngapha kwicephe lokuqala.
Can you identify that document?
Ungakwazi ke ukuyazi le ncwadi phambi kwakho?
Yebo.
Yes.
And what is that document?
Yini le ncwadi?
Exhibit FF6.
It's exhibit FF6, Your Worship.
Major Ncheche, I'm talking about the document in front of you, your statement. Is that your statement?
Usho incwadi le phambi kwakho ke ingaba isona statement noma incazelo yakho?
Have you told him where to find it? What page?
Yes, on page, yeah, I did indeed so, Chair. Major
Page
Ncheche,
number 2.
I think look at, when she mentions pages, look at the top right-hand corner.
Baba biza ke amacephe ubheke phezulu esandleni sakho sokudla.
Yebo. Kunjalo.
Yes, I can see that, Your Worship.
and can you turn to page 2 of that document?
Vula ngapha kwicephe lesibili.
Sengivulile.
Is
I
that-
have already opened the page.
Is that your signature at the bottom?
Kunjalo ukuthi ke umbhalo wakho lo la enzansi noma i-signature yakho.
Kunjalo.
That is true.
Major,
I think we should say there's a signature that is much lower and his is higher than that on the page. Is it your signature that appears immediately above the words Ncheche, Operation Officer at Road AOT?
Umbhalo wakho noma i-signature yakho eqhamuka nje la ngaphansi kwamagama akho Ncheche.
Kunjalo. Yimi engisayinile la.
That is true, Your Worship. I'm the one that signed.
Thank you.
thank you, Chair. Major Ncheche, are you satisfied with the contents of your affidavit? And you attest that the contents within is true and correct?
Uyaneliseka iloko okubhaliwe la kule ncazelo yakho ke ukuthi ngempela lokho okubhaliwe lapho ikhona okuyiqiniso.
Yebo, ngiyaneliseka.
Yes, I'm satisfied with it.
Well, except for one thing, this does not appear to be an affidavit. It appears to be just a statement. I said except for one thing, that is that I see there is a SAPS stamp, or there are two at page 2, but you don't say in that statement that you state under oath, and that does not appear to be any certification by Commissioner of Oaths that you took an oath before him or her before making the statement. Am I correct?
Uthi ke kunjalo ukuthi ke kule ncwadi ibonakala kuyi-statement ke na-ke akubonakali la uthathe khona isifungo kanti futhi akubonakali la umuntu okuyena wayekufungisa vela khona noma ke achaza ukuthi ukufungisile kunjalo.
Yebo, kunjalo.
Yes, that is true.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Major Ncheche, can you just give us a history about your career at the Air Force, in the military?
Ungasichazela ke namhlambe ke umsebenzi wakho ke labo usebenza khona kumnyango ke na ke we zwamabutho okuvikela.
I'm sorry, before he does so, that might be a long history. Do you want to relate to what position he held at the time? Otherwise, he could give you a history of over 20 years.
Indeed so, Chair. Let me just rephrase that question. Major Ncheche, from 2013, can you just give us a history of your career from the commencement of 2013 onwards?
Ungasichazela ke ukuthi ke na ke ukusukela ngo-2013 ke na ke ula kumbutho wezokuvikela umlando wakho.
Ngo-2013 bengisebenza e-command post.
During 2013, your ship was employed at the common post,
Endaweni ebizwa i-flight center.
the place which was called Flight Center.
I-rank yami lapho ngaleso sikhathi bengu-Sergeant Major Ncheche.
My rank at that stage, your ship was Sergeant Major Ncheche.
And what is your present position?
Kwamanje ke na ke isikhundla sakho uyini?
Njengamanje ngisebenza e-46 Brigade.
At this stage, your ship, I'm working at number 46 Brigade.
I-46 Brigade, it's an army unit.
46 Brigade is an army unit, your ship.
Kodwa sine-ofisi le-Air Force lapho.
But we also have an Air Force office there, your ship.
I-rank yami njengamanje ngu-Major Ncheche.
My rank now, your ship, I'm Major Ncheche, your ship.
In 2013, were you based at Waterkloof?
2013, bewusikade usebenzela eWaterkloof.
2013 bengise-command post ekuyi-headquarters ye-Air Force.
Water?
Bengise-command post,
2013, I was at the common post, your ship, Egobe.
command post,
Yeah.
kodwa ekuyi-headquarters ye-Air Force.
But-
Umkhulu we-Air Force.
But at the headquarters, your ship, of the Air Force, your ship.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I've just received word from the technical team that if Major Ncheche could just pull the mic closer to him, they're having difficulty.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Major Ncheche, taking it back to the landing of the aircraft in questions, and in terms of your statement, in terms of paragraph 2, can you please explain to the Chair the processes that was followed in your position where you were stationed at the Air Command Post?
Masibuyela emuva ke na ke maqondana ukuzofikeni kwalendiza ke lapho kuleso sikhumula mawubheka lapho ku paragraph 2 ungasichazela ke lonke uhlelo la landelwa noma okwenzakala.
Ku-paragraph 2, isicelo siza ngezindlela ezimbili.
In paragraph 2, your ship, the request came in 2 forms.
Ocelayo engayithumela kithi e-command post,
Whoever is making a request can send it to us at the common post,
okanye ithumelwe i-DERCO,
or ayithumele eDerko.
okanye isicelo sithunyelwe i-DERCO size kithi e-command post.
Or your ship, the request can be sent to DERCO and thereafter to us at the common post.
Major Ncheche, and in this instance, was a request given in terms of, procedurally, in terms of the plane landing at the base?
Kulokhu ke na ke kunjalo ukuthi khona isicelo siyafika ke ukuya ngohlelo okumele lilandelwe lokuthi leyo ndiza izofikela lapho.
Ngendaba esikuyo njenganamhlanje, isicelo lesi sasuka kwi-embassy ye-India siza kithi.
According to the processes that we are in today, your ship, their request, your ship, came all the way from India, your ship, coming down to us, Your Worship.
The request you referred to was what request?
Isicelo lesi okhuluma ngaso noma i-request leyo eyani?
Isicelo isicelo sokuthi indiza izongena ilende izohlala eWaterkloof.
The request, Your Worship, that there was a flight that is coming, Your Worship, which is going to land at Waterkloof.
Maybe to step back a little bit, in the position which you held in 2013, what were your functions? You don't need to tell us all of them, but those that might be relevant to what we are talking about today.
Kulesikhundla bosiphethe ngo-2013, imisebenzi yakho bekuyini ke na-ke akunasidingo sokuthi usitshele konke kodwa okubalulekile okumaqondana nalokho.
Embuthweni wezokuvikela kusebenza irank.
Your Worship, at the army, Your Worship, the rank, Your Worship, is what is important.
Ngaleso sikhathi sifika isicelo njoba ngisho ukuthi bengu sergeant major kodwa bengisebenza nabanye abangaphansi kwamababili.
At the time when the request was sent, Your Worship, as I say, I was a sergeant major, bowusebenza nababili abangaphansi kwakho.
Yebo.
I was working with the other two, Your Worship, who were under my command.
So isicelo masifika kuba kumuntu osibonile isicelo njoba sibathathu.
When the request arrived, Your Worship, it will depend from the person who saw the request first, Your Worship, as there were three of us.
Kulokhu isicelo sabonwa yimi ngasebenza ngaso.
With this, Your Worship, the request was actually seen by myself, Your Worship, and I then dealt with the request.
And the request, as you said, was a request for permission, authorization to be granted for the landing of an aircraft.
Leso sicelo ke kwakuyisicelo ke na-ke sokucela imvumo yokuthi ke na-ke indiza lena-ke izofikela lapho.
Yebo.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, yes, continue.
Ungaqhubeka?
Thank you, Chair.
Well, I'm sorry, he hadn't finished. He had said the one who sees the request is the one who acts. I think he was still continuing. Just finish that
Yeah.
part of the evidence.
Njengoba uthi
In
wena
this case, you saw it and what happened?
uye wasibona lesicelo wase usebenza ngaso ungaqhubeka kusuka lapho.
So isicelo masingena njengalesi ngoba sasisuka ku-embassy yase-India.
The request, Your Worship, after it arrived as it was from the Indian embassy,
Kuwumsebenzi womuntu ositholile isicelo ukuthi ahlele
it is the duties, Your Worship, of the person who received the request, Your Worship, to organize it.
so njengalesi njoba sasisitholile kuwa kuwumsebenzi wami ukuthi ngisihlele ngokuthi ngisithumele kuzinhlaka zikahulumeni.
As I'm the one who received it, Your Worship, I was the one who was supposed to process it, Your Worship, by sending it to the government departments, Your Worship.
So izinhlaka zikahulumeni ngikhuluma ngazo lapha na ku number 3.
The government departments, Your Worship, mentioned at paragraph 3.
Yes,
So
yes, continue if you haven't finished.
Yeah.
izinhlaka lezo ezinye zazo ezibalekile yiyo iDerco.
These departments I'm talking about, Your Worship, some of them that are important is DERCO.
So ngokuthola ke ilokhu isicelo sathumela kuzo zonke lezi inhlaka ezikhona ezibaluliwe lapha ebhaliwe.
After we received this request, Your Worship, we sent the request to all these important departments, Your Worship, which are mentioned here.
And maybe you can just mention those departments mentioned in paragraph 3.
Ungazichaza mhlawumbe lezo zinhlaka okhuluma ngazo.
NTNS,
Yeah.
ATNS
ATNS,
okuyi air traffic navigation system,
which is a traffic navigation system,
be CAA,
CAA,
Civil Aviation Authority,
Civil Aviation Authority,
kube DOT,
and then the DOT,
Department of Transport,
which is the Department of Transport,
be DFR,
and then the GFR,
Defense Foreign Relation,
Defense Foreign Relations,
kube SSO,
and then the SSO,
Senior Staff Officer,
which is the Senior Staff Officer,
kube DHA,
and then the DHA,
Department of Home Affairs,
the Department of Home Affairs,
kube CJ Ops,
and then the CJ Ops,
Chiefs Joint Operations,
Yini?
Chief Joint Operations.
Chief Joint Operations, Your Worship.
Thank you. Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. The request, Major Ncheche, the request that you are talking about, Chair, I'd just like to refer the Chair to Exhibit FF8 on the additional bundle, page 27.
Page 27.
And it continues, Chair, to page 28 and 29.
28, 29.
Have you got the right file? It should be written Exhibit FF8 on the spine. FF8.
8, Your Worship, yes.
Okay, page 27. 27 is 027. You will see on the right-hand top corner, it will be written WKAEDI info 027. But when she refers to pages, she won't mention all these letters,
Yes, sir.
and she won't mention the 0 before 27.
Yep.
She'll just say 27. So if that hasn't been explained, you can be confused. Okay, you found it.
Who's for toilet?
Okay.
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Major Ncheche, can you just identify that document?
Ungasitshela ukuthi ke na ke leyo ncwadi ke yini?
Overflight and landing clearance.
Overflight and landing clearance.
And is this the document that was received by the command post?
Iyona ke le ncwadi ke na ke oye wayithola?
Yebo.
Yes.
And after receiving this document, what steps did you take in terms of this document?
Emva kokuthi uthole ke na le ncwadi noma lesicelo uye wathatha ziphi inyathelo?
Njengoba besengishilo sekuqaleni, mawuthole isicelo esifana nalesi uthumela kuyinhlaka ezihlukene zikahulumeni.
As I've already testified before, after receiving such a request, you send it to different departments, Your Worship.
Kodwa ke uhlaka olukhulu iDerco.
But the highest department is DECO, Your Worship.
Yes, I think you may want to just complete the process that you explained. And I see in paragraph 4 it says once the process has been completed, then you say what happens. Then you can deal with the question of whether that is what you did with this request.
Okay, yeah. Ngaqhubeka usichazele uyithumele lapho and then walandela uhlelo ke emveni kwalapho ke na ke.
So uma usuyithumele enhlakeni lezo bese ngiyishilo. Kuye kube umsebenzi wethu ukuthi ulandelele ukuthi kwabona benzani ngayo.
After you shall have sent this request, Your Worship, to the specific departments,
Ubungula uyalinda leso sikhathi.
As they are still busy checking on it, Your Worship, you will wait for that period.
Musalindile kuyoze kufike isikhathi ukuthi sebekuthumela ke impendulo ukuthi qhubeka ngayo.
After you shall have waited, Your Worship, and they will then send you a feedback as to what is actually happening about it.
Who would come back to you? Is it DERCO or is it all of the departments to which you would have sent it?
Yiphi inhlaka ke ezokwazisa ukuthi kwenzakalani uDeco noma zonke lezi ntaka?
iDerko.
Deco, Your Worship.
Okay, yes, and what are the possible responses that could come from DERCO in any particular case when you have sent them this kind of request?
Iziphi mhlawumbe impendulo ongahle uzithole ezivela kwaDeco ke uma ngabe uthumele isicelo esifana nalesi?
Impendulo kuba ukuthi qhubeka nesicelo.
Oh, the answer might be that continue with the request.
And if they say continue with the request, what does that mean? Is it that they are happy with it, you should do what you need to do?
Mabathi qhubeka nesicelo lokho kusho ukuthini? Kusho ukuthi ke baya thokoziswa ileso sicelo wena ungaqhubeka wenza okufanele ukwenza.
Nabe ngithumele ke i-email yokuthi ngiqhubeke nesicelo thina ke njoba sihleli lokho command post.
After they sent us the email that we must continue with the request, Your Worship, Chairperson, we, as we were at the command post,
Isicelo ngabe siqhubeka le nto bayibiza ngegama lesilungu not verbal. Not verbal.
if they say we must proceed, Your Worship, they call it in an English word, which is note verbal.
Yes.
Uma command post ungayitholanga igunya lokuthi qhubeka nesicelo.
As the command post, if you didn't receive information which says continue with the request,
Awunawo amandla ukuthi ungaqhubeka naleso sicelo.
you don't have the powers to can continue with such a request.
So, am I correct that you can expect either to receive the note verbal, in which case you continue and give consideration to the request for clearance, or you don't receive anything from DERCO, in which case you don't give further consideration to the request?
Ngamanye amagama ungathola ke impendulo vela kuDeco ethi uqhubeke mangabe mhlambe bajulisekile noma banelisiwe ochaza ukuthi ungaqhubeka, kepha ke mawungatholanga lutho elikucaciselayo noma elikuchazelayo akho ngendlela ongaqhubeka ngakhona.
Kunjalo uqhubeka mawuthole isicelo sithi qhubeka ngaso DERCO. Kodwa uma watholanga lutho awunawo amandla ukuthi ungaqhubeka naleso sicelo.
That is correct, Chairperson. You only continue if you get a message from DECO which says you can continue. But if you don't get such an information, you don't have any powers to can continue.
If you don't get the note verbal, but somebody tells you telephonically that you may proceed, do you have power to proceed and consider the request?
Uma ungatholi impendulo ke ngokombhalo mhlambe ke kodwa kube khona umuntu okuthinta ngocingo ekuchazela ukuthi iqhubeka, unawo amandla ukuthi uqhubeke?
Mphathi wehlelo before ngaphambi ukuthi ngiphendule lo mbuzo.
Chairperson, before I can answer that question,
EDERCO umuntu esisebenza ebesikade sisebenzisana naye ngaleso sikhathi.
the person with whom you were working hand in hand that specific point in time
Umnumzane William Machile.
was Mr. William Machila, Your Worship.
Ngamanye amazwi ke kuphume kuye isicelo ukuthi ungaqhubeka nesicelo esifana naleso.
which means, Your Worship, sometimes we could receive a message which will say you can continue with such a request.
Mase ngiphendula umbuzo wakho kahlalo. Akwenzeki ukuthi uqhubeke ngesicelo utshelwe ngefoni ngocingo.
If I answering your question, Chairperson, it doesn't happen that you can continue, Your Worship, only after receiving a telephonical confirmation.
And the note verbal is a specific document?
Pardon, Chairperson?
Is a note verbal a specific document that gives you this go-ahead?
Kungamanye amagama ke na kufanele kube khona ke na ke incwadi ngokombhalo okuyiyona ke ezokunikeza ke na ke isivumelano sokuthi uqhubeke.
Yebo kunjalo incwadi enemniningwane yalo sesicelo leso esithi qhubeka naleso sicelo leso.
Yes, Your Worship, it must be a document, Your Worship, with all the particulars, Your Worship, of the request, which will say you can continue, Your Worship.
And am I correct in understanding that it's not just any document in writing, it has to be a note verbal before you can proceed that you are given by DERCO?
Noma kan futhi ke na ke akusi inoma incwadi nje ethize kufanele kube incwadi ke na ke enophawu oluthize ke ukuthi livela kwaDERCO elikunikeza igunya lokuba uqhubeke.
Kunjalo.
That is true.
Thank you. Continue. I think we'll take the lunch break at 1:15.
Indeed so, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, since we're on the note verbal topic, if Chair can please turn to page 87 of bundle FF8.
87.
87.
Yes.
Major Ncheche, are you there?
Ukwazile ukuyithola?
Yebo ngilithole.
Yes, I'm there.
Major Ncheche, can you identify this document?
Ungakwazi ke ukusichazela ukuthi yini leyo ncwadi phambi kwakho?
Iyona i-note verbal ephuma kuDERCO.
This is the note verbal from DERCO.
Just to bring to
I think it's a note verbal, not any particular one relating to this incident. Is that correct?
Come again, Chairperson.
Is it a note verbal and not the note verbal relating to this incident?
A note verbal ke na ke maqondana nalesehlakalo esikuso manje.
Cha akusiyo lena umfanekiswa nje.
Yeah.
Obonisa ukuthi note verbal.
Yeah.
No, it's not this one, Your Worship. This is just, Your Worship, a copy which shows that.
Yeah. Yes, no, I understand that it's an example of a note verbal.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, umfanekiso we note verbal leyo.
Indeed so, Chair. This was a document received from DERCO, just for an example, what a note verbal would look like.
How it looks like, yeah. Thank you.
And the note verbal, just to add, Chair, would usually, as relayed by DERCO, would usually have the emblem of the country,
The requesting country.
the requesting country.
Yeah.
And if you look at the bottom of the page, Chair, you will then see a stamp from the embassy of the Republic of this particular country on that note verbal.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair, I would also like to refer to another exhibit file. Would be on page 198
Which exhibit?
Exhibit FF4.
What page on that one?
198, Chair. 198.
Okay. Yes.
Major Ncheche, are you on page 198?
Chapter 198. Yes.
The lower half of that document, can you identify this? It particularly relates to an email. Can you identify from who it's from to whom?
Email lena ke ungakwazi ke ukuthola ukuthi ke ivela kubani le email?
Yebo ngakhona.
Yes. Yes, I can.
Can you please relay that? Can you just talk who it comes from?
Ungasichazela ke ukuthi ke iqhamuka kubani?
Ngokwenjwayelo njoba bese ngishilo email lena iqhamuka kumnumzane Machila.
Usually, as I've already stated, Your Worship, this email was from Mr. Machila.
To whom?
Iya kubani?
Izakithi command post la ngangisebenza khona ngaso sikhathi.
To us at the command post where I was working at that point in time.
And can you just read out the subject line of that email?
Kukhona ke na umuqa ke okuyiwona ke okumiyalelo kule email.
Well, you should just read that yourself because
Okay.
there's interpretation.
As the chair pleases. Subject line, a request for flight clearances, Indian delegation.
Tikena umyalelo lapho ukuthi ke na ke ukuvunyelwa ke na ke izindiza noma indiza ke okuyindiza ke zase India uyabona.
Ngiyayibona into izinto ezibhaliwe lapha phansi.
Yeah.
Kodwa ke kukabili.
I can see what is being written here, Your Worship, but it's twice, Your Worship.
Eyoqala engakhuluma ngayo le bhalwe say attach. Attach is a briefing email from Derco.
The first one, Your Worship, it's what is written here, itini?
State visit that indicates that Mr. Kolwane verbally approved.
State visits that indicates that Mr. Kolwane approved.
Esibili besithi dear colleagues.
And the second one, it says, dear colleagues,
Please see the message below your agent assistance and information.
please, colleagues, please see the agent.
I think it's fine. He read it in English.
yes.
So it's fine, yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson.
I see the one email that says, please see message below for your agent assistance and information. The one that I'm struggling to see is the one he mentioned earlier about Mr. Kolwane. Or is it the top email just above the words regards Les Lombard? Is it the sentence above that you read or that you are referring to?
Uyabona ke la bekade ufunda khona usihlalo uqeda ukuchaza yiko lokho bowusho ngakho.
Yibo yiyo le bengiyibona.
Yes, Worship, that's what I was referring to.
Okay, thank you. You said you can talk about these two.
Tike
Issues.
ilezi zimbili ongakhuluma ngazo.
Mphathi uhlelo. Mangivula futhi ikhasi lami ku cast number 199.
When I turn the
199.
page to page 199,
Le bengiyifundile yokuqala ku 198.
the first one that I read in page 198.
Yes.
ayikhulumi kahle ayichazi kahle into echazwa ku 199.
It doesn't exactly specify as what is said in page 199, Worship.
Okay, no, that's all right. Maybe this is the right time for us to take the lunch adjournment, and then we'll come back and continue.
Thank you, Chair.
We are going to take the lunch adjournment, and we will resume at 2:15. We adjourn.
Ungayivali iyekele khona lapho.
Alo yabona kunjani? Yabona ayichazi kahle ukuthi indlela